All right. Well, I'm really excited about tonight's lecture because tonight's lecture is a very pivotal one in many different ways. Not only are we pretty much in the middle of the semester, I think tonight is the seventh lecture out of 15, but we're also looking at a very pivotal character, a very pivotal thinker in the history of Western philosophy, and that is Immanuel Kant. And we're going to talk through why there's a sense in which he changed everything. And as I mentioned last week, I was very shocked when one of my seminary professors, when I was studying to be a pastor, said that most people in the church have been influenced more by Immanuel Kant than they have been by Jesus Christ. And I didn't even know who Kant was at the time. And most people don't in the church. However, his way of thinking and his influence has just completely pervaded our culture, and we pick up his ideas and his influence whether we know it or not, or whether we even know who Kant was or not. Because as I've said many times, and Schaeffer would agree, even the vast majority of people don't read the philosophers, but the philosophers' ideas get passed down to the culture through various art forms, through our TV, our music, our literature, our poetry, our songs, etc., etc. So even those in the church, because they've grown up in Western culture, have been influenced by Kant. Well, the way that I'm laying out this class is a history of philosophy, and philosophy being the search for ultimate answers. And as I've said, how we figure out the right answers plays a big part in the answers that we land on. So a huge part of the history of how things have changed, how the stages have gone from one to another, is this whole relationship between faith and reason. Understanding the different relationships between faith and reason and how people viewed faith and reason differently throughout the years helps us understand how the stages progressed down through Western culture. So just quickly to summarize, in the pre-modern era, people saw faith and reason working together. In the modern era, it was more of the understanding that no, faith really wasn't necessary. All we needed was our human reason. And there was an extreme optimism about what we could accomplish and know through reason alone. Even people began to think that we could achieve absolute certain knowledge using reason. We're going to start to see, and maybe even last week we started to see, how that attempt failed, how people started to recognize that reason wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And because of that failure of reason by itself, so to speak, we moved into more of a postmodern way of thinking, where, as I've been saying, a postmodern thinker, they still keep faith and reason as enemies, like the modernists did, but whereas modernism elevated reason and looked down on faith, the postmodern way of thinking is to elevate faith and look down on reason. And as I mentioned, when faith is separated from reason, it becomes something completely different. It becomes like a whole new animal that I think is best to describe as irrational faith. So faith separated from reason becomes more based on emotion, feelings, passions, desires, and that's an irrational faith. And we'll see so many thinkers in the 1800s and 1900s promote this idea of irrational faith, even within the church. So one of the things that motivates me to not only study philosophy but also teach philosophy is to protect people. As a pastor shepherd, I'm burdened to protect the church. I'm burdened to protect people from these, as I see them, incorrect ideas, false teaching, whatever you want to call it, that creeps into the church so easily, these postmodern ideas of irrational faith. Okay, we're walking through these stages, and there's a sense in which we're maybe stage 4, stage 5, at least the birth of these ideas. They don't really take hold and become the majority way of thinking for quite a while. But in the late 1700s, early 1800s, we definitely see the birth of the ideas that take us out of modernism and into what I'm calling here the postmodern era. So to help us with that, we're taking a look at the two main critics of reason, David Hume and Immanuel Kant. And these two are very famously known as some of the major early critics of reason. Last week we looked at David Hume, and if you remember, he pointed out that the optimism about empiricism was overblown. The empiricism, the idea that science could get us to absolute certainty, Hume really went after that idea and showed that if all of our knowledge comes from our experience, then there's no way we can get to absolute certainty. So I think Hume is helpful in that regard to kind of knock down our pride, so to speak, and help us realize the limitations of reason. We noted towards the end of the lecture last week that Kant admitted that he was woken up from his dogmatic slumber by Hume's work. Now, what he meant by that, Kant, what he meant is that I was thinking dogmatically, like most people were, that we could get absolute certainty, and that was really not that hard to do. We could accomplish that. And I was kind of slumbering in that idea. I just assumed that we could get absolute certainty. But then Hume comes along and he woke me up from that slumber. So Kant understood what Hume was getting at. Kant understood the problems that Hume was pointing out. And so this began a 12-year project for Kant to try to refute Hume. He wanted to rescue absolute certainty from Hume. He wanted to rescue science and rescue reason from Hume's crushing skepticism. So Kant is one of those key pivotal thinkers that really stands at the end of an era, but at the same time stands at the beginning of the next era. Because what we see in Kant's work is the end of the optimistic hope that reason could figure out everything on its own. We see in him really the end of the lofty goals of reason being able to get everything right, figure everything out. Because he lays down the limitations of reason. But he's still, on one hand, he's still the culmination of the Enlightenment. He's still the culmination of the modern era because he does claim to establish absolute certainty. But you're going to see tonight, at the same time, though he claims to establish absolute certainty, he has to do it by limiting reason. And so there's another sense in which we see in him the roots of postmodernism, where reason starts to be attacked or criticized. And that'll make more sense as we go through it. These are three of his most well-known books. And what we're going to do tonight is just walk through the three tasks that he put before himself. So this 12-year project that he put in front of himself had three tasks. Task number one, he wanted to set out to rescue reason and science from Hume, reason, science, and absolute certainty from Hume. But in doing that, he limits the reach of reason. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like the end of modernism. He achieves absolute certainty in number one, but that in number two, he does that by limiting and critiquing reason. But in accomplishing his second task, he supposedly or thinks that he rescues faith at the same time. Now, this is a huge undertaking, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why Kant is so impressive in that sense, even though I harshly disagree with him. What he sets before him is really to, accomplish this great task of rescuing reason, rescuing faith, shutting up Hume. So he's got some great goals set before him, and I guess we can evaluate whether he achieved these goals or not. I think it was a disaster, but I'm kind of playing my cards. You probably know by now what I think about Kant. All right, so let's look at his first task here. So, task number 1, he wants to rescue reason, science, and absolute certainty from Hume's crushing skepticism. So his goal here is absolute certainty, right? He wants to maintain that. And he claims that he did through a Copernican revolution. He solved or he rescued absolute certainty through his Copernican, as he referred to it, his Copernican revolution. I'll summarize it here and then I'll walk through it in more detail. Basically, he said, we can have knowledge that's absolutely certain, not because of objective truth out there in reality, but because of subjective truth that we have here in our minds, in the way that our minds work. So you can see from that he's changing really the location of truth from being out there to being in here. And that's how he rescues absolute certainty. So let's look at his Copernican revolution. Now, the reason he called it that, obviously, is because of Copernicus, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of Copernicus and his revolution, right? The original Copernican revolution. And that was simply the case as a scientist. Copernicus came along and he said, look, in the past, we've all thought that the earth was in the center and didn't move, and the sun went around the earth. That's what we had thought for all these years. But Copernicus, as a scientist, proved that that was incorrect. That was his Copernican revolution. And he proved as a scientist that no, in fact, it's the sun that's in the center, and the earth goes around it. Okay? So that's the original Copernican revolution. We all know that from our history classes. So Kant comes along and he says, look, I've got a Copernican revolution as well. And it's very similar. And this is what Kant explained as his Copernican revolution. He said, look, in the past, we used to think about human knowledge like this. We used to think that the world, or the objective world, the universe, maybe we would talk in those terms today, objective reality out there, the world, the universe, whatever, out there, nature. We used to think that that was the center of human knowledge. And our minds just kind of soaked up the information that was out there in nature, in the world. So the world was the center of knowledge, or the universe, nature, or whatever you want to call it, objective reality out there was the center of knowledge, and our mind was just kind of a passive organ that just soaked up that information out there. And he said, nope, we've been thinking about it all wrong this whole time. That's not how human knowledge works. He said, in fact, it's the opposite, that our minds are the center of knowledge. Because it's through our minds that we view the world. So in our minds, according to Kant, are certain grids, categories, filters, if you will, views, built-in categories that make sense of our experiences of the world. So he was the first to come along and say that there's these things in our mind, these categories, these views that shape our understanding of the world. And it's those categories, those views, those grids, which is the center of our knowledge, not the world itself. Do you see the difference? It's a little bit complicated, and Kant is notoriously difficult to read and try to understand. But this is very, as simply as I can put it, his huge shift in knowledge and really in truth. So we have these, according to Kant, these built-in, we project these categories on our experiences to make sense of the world. So we're projecting things on our experiences. We're projecting things onto the world, onto objective reality. So it's our mind that shapes how we experience and view reality. So just take causality for example. Causality isn't something out there in objective reality. Causality is something that our mind structures into our experiences. So very kind of similar to what Hume was saying, that causality is just a habit of our mind. It doesn't exist out there as a real thing, but it's something that we've developed in our way of thinking that we project onto reality. So he was one of the first to say that our minds is what's creating our experiences, not the world. So in the past, people thought, well, the world, the external reality creates our experiences. And Kant's saying, actually, no, it's more the other way around. Our mind is creating our experiences as we look through these particular grids or categories or views of the world. Now, he didn't take this to an extreme like folks will do afterwards. So he wasn't saying that there was no objective reality, and he wasn't saying that we weren't getting anything from external reality. He said, no, we are getting information from external reality, but it's that our mind is forming and shaping it so that we can understand it. And if we didn't have these grids, these categories, these worldviews, then we would not be able to make sense of external reality. So you might be asking, well, how does this rescue absolute certainty? How does this save absolute certainty? Well, let me put it this way. I think this next slide is really key to understand why Kant would make this move. Remember, he's trying to rescue absolute certainty. He wants to maintain that we can have absolute certain knowledge. So let me say it this way. If you glued rose-colored glasses on your face, what would you know for certain about how you're going to experience the world tomorrow? And I'm using rose-colored glasses as a simple example of a worldview. It's more than just our sights, but looking is an easy way to do that because our visual senses are our primary senses as human beings. But it's not necessarily rose-colored glasses on our eyes. It's rose-colored glasses in our mind's view of things, the way that we think. But use glasses just for a simple example. If we're going to super glue rose-tinted glasses and super glue them on our face, we can know with absolute certainty that tomorrow we're going to view the world rose-colored. So the absolute certainty, the absolute truth isn't out there. That's not where absolute certainty comes from. Absolute certainty comes from how we view the world through these respective worldviews. And he wouldn't use the term worldviews. He would say there's only one worldview. He was one of those who thought we all have to look at the world a certain way to make sense of it. So he didn't use the term worldviews, plural. He just said all of us as human beings view the world the same way. But you can see where this is going, right? I mean, it's not very long after Kant where people come along and they say, well, maybe we don't all view the world the same way. Maybe we have different categories or grids that we view the world from. And so this, in a sense, this is the birth of relative truth, subjective truth. You have your view, I've got my view. We can't really access objective reality directly to be able to determine who's right or wrong. We're just stuck with our various views. And all we have to do is just find a way to get along. We can't really find out who's true because we don't have access to external reality. Now, Kant didn't go that far, but this is the beginning of that position.
This is what you were talking about last week or the week before about he tried to do one thing and ended up harming Christianity. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah. Now, it's through this that he thinks he rescues the Christian faith. And so part of his motivation, as I said, I think he had some good motivations. He was trying to rescue. He loved the Christian faith and he wanted to rescue it. But I think he ends up destroying it instead. So, here's how he rescues absolute certainty. We can be absolutely certain not about the objective world out there, but about how we subjectively experience the world in here, in our minds. So you can see how, again, this moves the location of truth from being out there to being in here. It points people to look inward for truth. And I keep saying this, but I don't want to make you think that Kant, was the one who took this and developed himself subjective relative truth. That happened from his ideas, but he himself said that we all have the same grid. We all have the same view. We all have the same categories. We all have a universal way of viewing the world rationally. So he was very optimistic about this. He said, when people get rid of all their biases and they learn how to reason and use rationality well, they'll all view the world the same way and will be able to agree and get along. We just have these built-in grids, and if we learn how to use them right, that's why he's affirming universal truth, absolute truth, because we all have to view the world the same way, according to him. A necessary framework for understanding the world. You have to have these, or you can't think at all, according to Kant. But as I said, it didn't take long for others to come along and say, well, what if we don't all have the same view? What if our minds work differently? And that is how relative truth, subjective truth was born. And in a sense, this is the beginning of constructivism, the idea that we construct our own reality. We can't know true reality. All we can know is our view of reality. Now, Kant was a constructivist. Kant was not a constructivist, okay? But he developed the roots of it, which later has come along and took and developed it into this constructivism, that we just construct our own subjective reality. If there is an objective reality, we have no connection with it because we're all just stuck in our respective worldviews. And this might help you better understand why I don't like the term worldview. It's kind of a buzzword in Christian circles, and most of the time people using that term just don't know the history of it and where it comes from. But this is the root of the term itself. It was coined in this early 1800s German philosophy. And I just wholeheartedly, I don't want to use terminology that's going to further this, as I see it, mistaken way of thinking. So I want to be able to say more, I want to be able to make, even in my language, to help people understand how things work more accurately. So I want to talk about I have beliefs about objective reality, and those beliefs could be right or wrong, and we should evaluate our beliefs based on good reasons and evidence. So I'm willing to talk about our beliefs, and they're objective. They could be right, they could be wrong. And I want to avoid all this subjective, relative language about views or perspectives or your opinion, and you have your opinion, and we can't really know what's true. We just have our different views. I want to avoid that type of language because it buys into all of this thinking. And the world ends up hearing from us things that we don't intend to mean by it. We just don't want to pick up the popular worldly language and use it and try to redefine it when it has 200 years of history already. Okay, let's go back to his tasks. So that's only task one for Kant, right? He's trying to rescue reason, science, and absolute certainty from Hume. I don't think he's successful. In doing task number one, he limits the reach of reason. And I'll try to explain how this, you can probably already see how this limits reason. It accomplishes, according to Kant, he still is able to hold on to absolute certainty, but it limits the reach of reason. And this is a big division for Kant. The phenomena and the noumena. Okay? So Kant says we can only know with absolute certainty how things appear to us. That's the phenomena. I'll say that again. We can only know with absolute certainty how things appear to us. That's the phenomena. We can't know things how they really are in reality. That's the noumena. We can't experience things directly as they really are. Everything that we experience is mediated through our senses, through our grids. So, for example, this is just a classic, almost silly example, but it makes the point. We can't say, according to Kant, that this apple is red. That's noumena. We can't know the apple in reality. The noumena, the reason cannot touch that. Reason cannot reach out to the actual apple. That's the noumena. All we can know with absolute certainty is how the apple appears to us. That's the phenomena. So, in other words, I can't say that the apple is red. All I can say is that the apple appears red to me. So my view is that the apple is red. I can't say the apple is red. All I can say is that's my view. My view is that it appears red to me. But if somebody looked at it under a different light, they might have a different view. Then they could say the apple appears purple to them. And this is how all knowledge works. We're just stuck in our respective views. We can't know the thing directly. All we can know is how it appears to us. All we can know with absolute certainty is our view of it. I can only know the subjective truth inside of me about how I view the world. I can't view the world itself. So he's pointing out the limitation on reason. Reason can get us absolute certainty, not about what's out there, but it can get us absolute certainty about what's in here. And so he's kind of setting, if you can think about this, he's setting a boundary around reason. He's saying, look, reason can do great inside this fence. Reason can know with absolute certainty inside the fence. But when it tries to go outside the fence, it completely fails. So he's setting out limitations on reason. Now he goes on and in his work, and he makes the case that reason, our reason, us, I mean he's talking about us, we try to go outside the boundary with our reason, because we want to know things. We just can't help it. We just want to know what's true. We want to know what's real. And so reason is always trying to jump outside the fence. It's always trying to figure out things that it can't figure out. The ultimate answers to life, the ultimate meaning and purpose to life. But whenever reason does that, whenever reason gets out of the fence and tries to go figure those things out that it can't, it ends up in contradictions. And it can't figure it out.
Is absolute truth and objective truth the same thing?
There would be some differences, but a lot of times they're used interchangeably. Yeah. A lot of times objective truth is compared with subjective truth, whereas absolute truth would be compared with changing truth. And you can see how objective truth would usually be absolute and unchanging, and subjective truth would be more changeable. They could change more easily. So whenever reason tries to figure things out that are outside the fence, it ends up in this dialectic, these contradictions. And this becomes a big idea in all sorts of different philosophies, from Marxism to Hegel's thought, this idea of dialectics. But in Kant, what he means by dialectics is these contradictions that reason runs into whenever it tries to figure things out that it can't figure out, when it goes outside the fence. So one of the things he says, depressingly, he says that the history of metaphysics is just a history of mock combat. Philosophers have never been able to figure anything out because whenever they use reason to try to figure out the ultimate answers, it just ends in these dialectics, just these contradictions. So it's like reason is a tragic story. Reason is kind of like a air-breathing jet. It wants to go higher and higher. It wants to leave the atmosphere, but since it's an air-breathing jet, as soon as it leaves the atmosphere, there's no air up there, and so it crashes and burns. And that's kind of like reason. It wants to go higher. It wants to go beyond its limits and figure things out, but as soon as it tries, it's tragic because it can't. It crashes and burns. So what are some of these things that reason just can't figure out? According to Kant, it's stuff like this. These are the things that reason can't figure out. These are beyond the phenomena. We can know the phenomena, how things appear to us, but we can't know these things as they really are. So these are the things that are kind of off limit in terms of reason's ability to figure out. Whether there's a human soul or not, whether humans have free will or not, whether there's an afterlife, or whether there's a God or not. And so, for example, one of the ways he tries to show that reason's just not helpful here is he'll take all of the historical arguments for the existence of God, some of the ones that we were talking about earlier, the teleological argument from God, the cosmological argument for God, first cause, argument from design. He'll take all those classical arguments for God and he'll show how they don't work. And it's not as though he's arguing against the existence of God. What he's arguing against is the ability of reason to figure out if there's a God or not. Does that make sense? So some people will read Kant's critique of the arguments for the existence of God and conclude, well, he was an atheist. He's arguing against the existence of God. And in fact, he's not. He's just trying to make the point that reason can't establish whether there's a God or not. And so he takes all the classical arguments for God and breaks them apart and tries to point out where they end up in contradictions. So it might not surprise you that other philosophers nicknamed him the great destroyer of knowledge. So one of the nicknames, even during his lifetime, In particular, Moses Mendelssohn was a contemporary philosopher that called him the great destroyer of knowledge, because he ends up in hard skepticism. Hard skepticism. Soft skepticism would say, look, I just don't know if these things are real or not. I don't know. Hard skepticism says, not only do I not know if these things are real or not, I can't know if these things are real or not. So he's even not even skeptical about these things existing, but skeptical about his ability to know if these things exist or not. Through reason. You can probably see where he's going with this. Reason isn't able to establish these things. So again, think about his tasks. And I know this is a lot of conceptual thought, and Kant can be very difficult. He thinks he saves scientific knowledge, because we can study and know about the phenomena, but this comes at a price. This comes at a price. And the price is that we can't distinguish between things as they appear to us versus things how they really are. So the absolute certain knowledge that we have comes from our own minds, not as things really are. Kant says we can't know how things really are through reason. And this puts up a barrier to knowledge. So for 200 years, from Kant, because of Kant, people are wrestling, trying to figure out how much of reality our mind creates and how much of reality is really out there. And you can see why a movie director like Christopher Nolan picks up on these ideas and makes movies about these ideas. You know, how are we creating reality through our minds? Or is reality something that actually exists out there? Or is it a combination of both? And this is the struggle then for 200 years of knowing, trying to figure those things out. Now, of course, Kant didn't see himself as the great destroyer, right? He thought he was accomplishing good things here. Remember his tasks. I'm going to rescue reason and science and absolute certainty from Hume. By doing that, I need to limit reason. However, when I limit the reach of reason, I rescue faith. And so he didn't see himself as the great destroyer. He thought himself as, in a sense, the savior of Christianity. Remember, that was part of his goal here, was to rescue Christianity. And so here's a very famous quote from Kant, talking about his second task. I found it necessary to deny knowledge of God, reason, freedom, afterlife, in order to find a place for faith. You can see, even in that sentence, he's seeing faith and reason as opposites. The less reason can do, the more there is a room for faith, because they're mutually exclusive. They're opposites. The more you have of one, the less you have of the other, which I just think is a huge mistake to view things that way, or to understand things that way. This mistake of seeing faith and reason as opposites, as enemies, is a carryover from modernism, but it's just a flipping of which one's important. So in modernism, they separated faith and reason. Remember that with Descartes, but they elevated reason and looked down on faith. Now we're going to start to see the beginning of keeping faith and reason as enemies, but elevating irrational faith, apart from reason, and looking down on reason.
See that one?
So it's a flipping now of the priority of faith or reason. So modernism was elevating reason, looking down on faith. We're beginning of postmodernism now. We're elevating irrational faith and looking down on reason. So both modernism and postmodernism see faith and reason as opposites. It's just which one is good. Is faith good or is reason good? So let me explain how this plays out then with free will. Okay, I think that might be one of the easiest ones to understand what's going on here. So we're going to talk more about this next week, but one of the things that came out of modernism was a mechanical understanding of the world. This is kind of part of deism, right? So they started to see the world, we would say the universe nowadays, they started to see all of reality just as this giant machine, right? Just a machine, a deterministic cause and effect machine. So all of reality, causes, effects, it's very scientific. It's like the world, the universe is just a giant machine, all these causes and effects. And at first, they thought of human beings as kind of outside the machine, outside of this deterministic cause and effect causal chain. We exist outside of that because we have free will, and we're not robots as part of the machine. We're not determined by cause and effect. We've got this free will thing. And so we can make decisions. And that's why we're morally accountable, because we're not determined like robots. We're separate from the universe in that sense, maybe because we have a soul or all sorts of different reasons why we would be outside the machine. But as modernism developed, people started to question, well, why think that we're outside the machine? And especially, as evolution comes along and places us right in the deterministic causal pathway of nature, it's like, no, there's cause and effect behind us as well. We're part of the machine. We're just cause and effect. We are like robots. So there is no free will. We're just programmed through nature and nurture, however you want to call it. We've been programmed. We're stuck. We're caught in that causal chain of events. And there is no such thing as free will. So that was what was becoming a popular way of thinking, right? That there is no such thing as free will. So think of it this way. People were using reason, science, to try to attack the idea of free will, okay? And Kant didn't like that. Kant wanted us to be able to hold on to our belief in free will. No, we have free will because if we didn't have free will, we wouldn't be morally accountable. We would just be like programmed robots. And so Kant wanted to rescue our belief in free will from being disproven via reason and science. Okay? So how does he do that? How does he rescue our faith or our belief in free will? Well, he says, remember, reason, science, can't know things as they really are. Reason and science can only know things as they appear to us, including us, human nature. So scientists, you can do all sorts of scientific experiments on us and experiment on our brains, experiment on our bodies. Scientists can study how humans appear to us all day long. But remember his limitation of reason and science. Reason and science can't know how things really are because that's outside the bounds of experience. All we can know is how humans appear to us. We can't know humans as they really are. And so by limiting reason, limiting science, limiting our ability to know human beings, then we are free to keep our belief in free will. In other words, science can't disprove our belief in free will. Not now, not ever. So he's rescuing, he thinks, our belief in free will from being attacked via reason and science. I think this is one of the most helpful illustrations. I hope this shows up well on the camera. But this is what's going on. I think this is a great visual of what's going on here. He wants to protect these beliefs, God, afterlife, free will, the human soul. He wants to protect those beliefs from reason. Some people are using reason and science to try to attack these beliefs. And in the past, previous thinkers have defended their belief in these things using reason and evidence. But he says, no, I can protect these beliefs even better by breaking them away from reason and saying these are beliefs that we believe in not because of reason. Reason and science can't touch these things. That's a completely separate realm, and science and reason can't get to it. So in other words, it's kind of like in a house, maybe with little kids, where you would put the things you want to protect up high on a shelf so the little kids can't get to them. And that's how he's viewing this situation, where he's putting these beliefs on an upper shelf where reason can't get to them. So you can't disprove my belief in God with your reason, with your science, because reason and science can't go there. And that's how he felt he was protecting these things, by limiting the reach of reason. As I point out here at the bottom, though, while maybe this protects faith in these things from being disproven, it also eliminates the possibility of using reasons and evidence to make a case that these things do exist. And that was part of his point in showing how the arguments, the reasoned arguments for God, fail. Because those just have to be a matter of faith, not reason. Now you can see how many churches, pastors, denominations just dove right into this. And even today, 200 years later, this is often used as a strategy to protect our faith. But not only by Christians. So as this has kind of become the way that our Western culture thinks, all sorts of beliefs can be protected this way. So let's say you have a belief in Islam. Same thing. Up on a shelf, reason can't touch it. You try to give somebody reasons to believe that Islam isn't true. Reason? What are you talking about? This is my faith. Reason and evidence doesn't even... It's like saying that the number 3 is green. It's like completely different categories. Reason, or Wicca, your belief in Wicca. Same strategy can be used. Your belief in atheism, I mean, whatever. Any belief then can use this strategy. Even though he wanted to use it for Christianity, your belief in leprechauns has nothing to do with reason and evidence. It's my faith. It's how I feel. It's how I believe on the inside. However you want to call it, reason and evidence can't touch it. We're just stuck with our different subjective views. So as I said, churches, pastors, whole denominations ate this up like candy. And so even today you see this mentality very often, this Kantian type mentality. And some of you hearing this might say, well, this makes a lot of sense. This might even be how I think of things. But it's because you were raised in the last 200 years in this Western culture. I don't think this is what the Bible teaches at all. This is a Kantian postmodern way of thinking. And part of why I've come to that conclusion is before the 1800s, you don't see this way of thinking anywhere. But it's so part and parcel of the culture that we live in, it almost just makes sense to us. So same strategy Christians use today. You see people trying to use reason, evidence to try to disprove Christianity. It causes a lot of Christians to retreat from reason, science, and evidence. So to protect their faith, they separate reason and evidence, and then put faith kind of on this upper shelf where reason can't get to it. And yeah, while that might protect their faith from being disproven, it also cuts them off from considering reasons and evidence for their faith. And then faith, as I keep saying, faith, when it's broken apart from reason, becomes this irrational, subjective thing, irrational choices, irrational faith based on desires, passions, feelings, emotions. And that is, in a sense, the birth of postmodernism. And then not only Christians use this strategy, but as I said, any faith or any beliefs that you want to hold can use and do use this strategy. Religion and science have nothing to do with each other because faith is a subjective feeling and science is more about the phenomena, studying how things appear to us, the physical things in the world, if you will. So let's evaluate this. Actually, maybe I've been going for an hour. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and evaluate Kant and see if you guys think he accomplished his 3 tasks. He claimed to rescue reason, science, and absolute certainty from Hume. Doesn't seem to me he did. Instead, he moved the location of truth from being out there to being in here and opened up the door for all sorts of problems: relative truth, worldviews, subjectivism, subjective truth. That truth is in our minds, not out there or up there. And so go back to my example of gender. Now it might make more sense why postmodern thinking in our culture think of gender as something that comes from the inside, not our anatomy, not our chromosomes. That's just looking at the phenomena. We can't know humans that way. All we can know is our view of ourselves. And if I view myself as a female, even though my anatomy is male, that's where truth is. It's in my view of myself. That's where absolute certainty, that's where truth is. So you can see where these ideas just cause problems in the church, in society. So no, I don't think he really rescues reason from Hume. Limiting the reach of reason. I don't think he's correct in that. It's so hard because, we don't want to elevate reason too much, but we don't at the same time want to look too down upon reason. It's like we need to maintain this middle ground. We don't want to go where the modern thinkers went and think that reason can accomplish everything and reason can figure everything out and even get us to absolute certainty. But it's kind of like his, thinking, and then postmodernism went from that extreme way over to this other extreme of just rejecting reason completely, where a pre-modern thinker would have more of a middle ground that reason is useful, reason is helpful, it works together with faith. It's not as great as the modernists think it is, but it's not as bad as the postmodernists think it is.
How far did he allow reason to reach?
Reason can only know the phenomenon. Reason can only know how things appear to you. You can only be absolute certain about your view. You can't be absolute certain about how things really are. So that was where his boundary is. That reason can't go beyond your view of things. He was very optimistic about that, though, because as I said, he thought everybody had to have the same view. He thought the categories of reason and rationality that we all have forced us to view the world the same way. So he would not condone the idea of different worldviews. He would say we all think universally the same way. There's only one worldview. But it was others who came along after him who said, actually, no, our brains, our views might work differently. So does he rescue faith? Boy, I don't think so. He transforms faith into something completely different. So whereas in the pre-modern way of thinking, faith was You trust something based on good reasons and evidence. Now faith becomes this irrational leap of faith, where reason and evidence aren't useful. In fact, they're harmful, and you just need to believe based more on your passions, your desires, your view, your emotions, your feelings, but definitely not based on reason and evidence, because reason and evidence aren't helpful here at all. So I always say, people don't read Kant, but they do watch Star Wars. And so, our children pick up these ideas from Star Wars, not Kant. So what does Obi-Wan Kenobi teach Luke? Trust your feelings. It's not about what you can see and figure out on your own with your reason in your head. It's about trusting yourself, trusting your feelings. So you might remember that classic scene in the first Star Wars movie in 1977, where you've got, in the Millennium Falcon, you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's training Luke Skywalker with the lightsaber on how to deflect shots, laser shots, and then Han Solo's kind of sitting off to the side making fun of him. You remember this scene? Very famous Star Wars scene. And in that scene, Han represents modernism. So you might remember Han is talking about science, technology, blaster at my side is what I trust. I've just seen all this old, silly religion stuff, and that's not really good or true or real. I'm just paraphrasing now. But what I trust is my technology, my blaster, my science. I mean, that's modernism, right? And Obi-Wan Kenobi says, well, how about this, Luke? And then he has Luke put down his visor on his shield. And so don't trust your eyes. They can deceive you. Don't trust reason. Don't trust your head. Instead, follow your heart. Follow your feelings. And so then with Luke, using the Force, obviously, but it's more about actually the words that Ben Kenobi uses is to trust your feelings. And then he's able to deflect those laser beams with the lightsaber because he's not using his senses, his mind, his reason, his evidence. He's using his heart. He's using his feelings. He's using what's on the inside. So that's how these ideas get passed down to our culture through art and movies and stories and literature. So does he rescue faith? No, I don't think so. He sends it down this path of trying to figure out things on its own, irrational faith. And so there's a sense in which he breaks science and religion apart. Faith and reason are enemies now. Science and religion are completely different realms that have nothing to do with each other. And this is how a lot of people think. Science and religion don't even touch. It's like calling the number 3 green. Science and religion have nothing to do with each other. Whereas I would say, no, there's a lot of things that, as a pre-modern thinker, I think there's a lot of things that we can discover. If you want to call it religious beliefs, I always find it very odd to call the existence of God a religious belief. But that is just part and parcel of this. There's religious beliefs, there's science beliefs, where it's like, I would just say, I've got beliefs about reality. They might be wrong, but I don't call them, religious beliefs or philosophical beliefs. I was trying to hang up a sign once for a debate on the existence of God at a coffee shop, and they said, well, we don't allow religious pamphlets to be hung up in our coffee shop. I'm like, well, actually, this isn't a religious debate. This is a philosophical debate on the existence of God. And my point was just that you can call it religion, you can call it whatever you want. It's just some people believe that there is a God and some people don't. And, either there is or there isn't a God in reality. And so let's try to ascertain what's really real about reality. Is there a God or not? You can call it philosophy, you can call it religion, you can call it just us trying to figure out what's true. So I don't make these categories, and I try to avoid those categorical distinctions. Well, these are my religious beliefs, and these are my scientific beliefs. No, all my beliefs work the same way, and they're just beliefs that I have about reality. Some of them might be wrong, and I've discovered beliefs I've had about reality that are wrong, and I've changed them. But I view all beliefs working the same way, and I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. In fact, let's do that now. Let's wrap this up. At this point, as I've taught this class so many times, at this point I find students have a difficult time distinguishing between the pre-modern way of thinking, where faith and reason are working together, and this Kantian postmodern way of thinking, where faith and reason are separated. So let me just very carefully, and I'm going to do this slowly, and you might even be annoyed about how slowly I do this, but I think it's just so critical to walk through this carefully so we can see the difference. And I'm advocating, obviously, you know, my cards are on the table. I'm advocating for a pre-modern way of thinking, a pre-modern position. But at this point, I'm just trying to explain the two positions so you can see the differences, okay? So let's just walk through these really slowly. So, in a Kantian or postmodern way of thinking, there are two types of beliefs, and they work completely differently, okay? There's science beliefs, or reason beliefs, if you will, and these beliefs can achieve 100% certainty through reason and evidence. Again, not about how things really are in and of themselves, but about how they appear to me, my view of them. So we can be 100% certain about these beliefs. This is reason, this is science, this is all. And then the other type of beliefs are religious beliefs or faith beliefs. And these type of beliefs, reason isn't helpful or useful at all here. These are irrational faith beliefs, religious beliefs, if you will. And here you don't use reason and evidence. Here you just take an irrational leap of faith based on your feelings, emotions, passions, maybe pragmatism, what works, or your desires. And just think of like a 10,000-foot high wall between these two types of beliefs, barbed wire on the top, electric fence. There's a boundary between these two beliefs. They can never touch. They can never inform one another. Completely separate realms of knowledge and different ways to get at truths in these two different categories. Whereas a pre-modern position says, no, all of our beliefs work the same way, no matter what it's about, whether it's a scientific belief or a religious belief or a belief in your spouse, that you trust your spouse. All of our beliefs work the same way, according to a pre-modern position. That's one of the main differences. Postmodernism, two different types of beliefs, they work differently. Pre-modernism says, no, all beliefs work the same way. A pre-modern position would say, 100% absolute certainty is not possible. We're not God. We're not omniscient. We can never achieve that level of certainty. That was the mistake of modernism, to think that we could. So reason and evidence, useful, good, helps, but can't get us to absolute certainty. This is critical. This was a mistake that I made for a long, long time in my thinking. The remaining percentage is not faith. Okay? So just think through this with me really carefully for a second. Use the example of trusting your spouse, okay? You know, I've been married for 24 years this summer, and let's just say hypothetically that all the time I've gotten to know my spouse, all the reasons and evidence I have that she's trustworthy, that she loves me, that she's faithful to me. Let's say I have all these reasons and evidence that take me up to based on all those reasons and evidence, I'm 80% certain that I can trust her. I'm 80% certain that she's faithful, that she loves me, however you want to say it. Trust in my... The mistake is to think of the remaining 20% as faith. So sometimes we mistakenly think of, okay, the reason gets us so far, and then the rest of the way we've got to take a leap of faith. And this, as a side note, is kind of, this mistaken way of thinking is even found in some, for example, in Frank Turek's name of his book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Just think about what that title says for a moment. That title, what he's getting at is there's not very much reason and evidence to believe in atheism. And so if I was going to believe in atheism, I'd have to take a huge leap of faith. And so by the title, he's implying this way of thinking. And, maybe he doesn't realize that, or maybe he doesn't think that that's wrong. But I think if he would sit down and think about it, I think that he would recognize that, oh no, in my very title, I'm saying that faith and reason are opposites. And that's what you'd be doing here if you thought of the remaining percentage as faith. But I think that's incorrect, and that's definitely not the way that pre-modern thinkers thought. Because if you think about it, if that were the case, then the more reasons and evidence you had to trust your spouse, the less faith you'd have in your spouse. Just think about it for a second. Let's say I'm married, and right now I'm 80% confident in her based on reasons and evidence. And if I thought of that extra 20% as faith, then maybe by next year, when we've been married 25 years, my reasons and evidence would take me up to 90% certainty. But if I'm thinking of that remaining percentage as faith, then I'd be saying that my faith in her has decreased from this year to next year. And that doesn't make any sense. I have more reasons and evidence to trust her. So my faith should increase in her, not decrease. So again, it's so insipid in our thinking to think of faith and reason as opposites that we have to constantly fight our way out of that way of thinking. So no, the opposite of certainty is not faith. The opposite of certainty is uncertainty. So if I'm 80% this year, I get to know my wife even better over the next year of marriage, and that raises me up to 90% certain based on reasons and evidence. My faith isn't decreasing, my faith is actually increasing in her. The uncertainty is what's decreasing. Now, because we can never get to 100% certainty, faith is required, right? Trust. Because think about it for a moment. If we could be, God doesn't have faith. God doesn't trust. God just knows. Because he is 100% absolute certain in his knowledge. So if we could somehow achieve that, and I don't think we can, if we could achieve 100% absolute certainty, there would be no need for faith or trust, because we would just know things. Because we can't get to 100% certainty, there is an element of faith and trust in all of our beliefs. But I think it's a mistake to identify this remaining percentage as the faith. So what do we mean then when we use the word faith as a pre-modern thinker? So a pre-modern position on faith. I think the term faith then can and should be used in two different ways. It's kind of like the word bark, right? We use the word bark in different ways. My dog barks. I barked at my son yesterday. There's bark on the tree out there. You know, the word bark can be used in a lot of different ways. And faith is that way too. A lot of words are fluid in the English language, in any language. So the term faith, I think, can appropriately be used to refer to two different things. First, it can be used to refer to the confidence that you have about a particular belief. So go back to the trusting your spouse example again. So my confidence in my wife grows, my faith in her grows as I get more reasons and evidence. So in terms of Christianity, my faith has grown, my confidence in Christianity has grown, gotten bigger as I've discovered more reasons and evidence to believe that Christianity is true. It's not that my faith is shrinking, my confidence is actually growing as I'm exposed to more reasons and evidence. So in this sense of using the term faith, it can range, it can be low, it can be high, but it's positively related to the reasons and evidence, not negatively related. You math wizards out there. There's a positive relationship here. So the more reasons and evidence you have, the more faith you have. They go up together, they go down together. The more reason and evidence you have, the greater your certainty percentage, the greater your faith is, the greater your confidence. So let's say, next year, been married for 25 years, I'm 90% certain, based on all these reasons and evidence I have, that my wife loves me and is faithful to me. So I would say my faith in her is very high. I have a very high confidence in her. And it grows as the reason and evidence grows. The other way I think it's appropriate to use the term faith is when we talk about a decision to trust something. And this is using faith more as a verb, like an action, a choice. I'm going to choose to trust you. Whereas in the first sense, we're using it more as a noun. And I see both of these terms in the Bible. And if you remember the first couple lectures, we went through all these verses where we talked about faith and reason, faith and evidence, how that works in the Bible. And faith is used in both of these senses, both as a noun in the first sense and as a verb in the second sense, as an action. So when you use the term faith in this action sense, it's either yes or no. It's either you're going to trust something or you're not. That's why I called it binary. It's either yes or no, black and white. You're going to trust something or you're not. This isn't about confidence levels. This isn't about certainty levels. This is, no matter what your certainty level is, no matter what your confidence level is, you can choose to trust something. So like skydiving, right? I've never been skydiving, probably never will. But, you get up there and you're very nervous. Maybe your confidence level is very low. You have a lot of reasons and evidence to trust that the parachute's going to work. You have good reasons and evidence, but maybe your confidence level is low. However, you need to make a binary choice. Either you jump or you don't. It's black or white. It's yes, I'm going to trust and I'm going to jump, or no, I'm not. And you can do that no matter where your confidence level is, no matter where your certainty level is. Maybe for whatever reason you have a very low certainty and you have a very low confidence, but you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to trust anyway, and you make that decision. Or like the game you've played, the faith game, where you stand up, you close your eyes, and you're going to fall backwards and trust if people are going to catch you or not. That's a binary decision. Either you fall backwards or you don't. You make a choice. No matter what your degree of certainty is or your degree of confidence is, it ends up being a choice to trust or not. So those, I think that's the two senses in which a pre-modern person would use the term faith. Either as the confidence you have about a particular belief or about the activity of choosing to trust something. And that's why I make the case from Scripture. I think Scripture teaches that faith is trusting something based on good reasons and evidence. So Jesus is asking us to trust Him. He's asking us to make a choice. But He's not asking us to do it blindly. He gives us all sorts of good reasons and evidence to base our faith on. to give us confidence so that we will make that choice to choose to trust him. But that's not different than other beliefs. That's how scientific beliefs work. That's how historical beliefs work, philosophical beliefs, whatever. It's just beliefs about reality, and then those beliefs can be true or false. All right. Well, let me go through the class syllabus real quick and make sure we're all caught up to speed. And let's just talk through where we're at as a class. There was no reading due this week because you guys were supposed to write your book review on the Tilter World book. So everybody email that book review to Caleb today. It has to be turned in today by midnight. So those of you taking it online, you'll be watching this, tomorrow at the soonest. But it is due today on October 1st. So if you didn't email it to him on October 1st, do that right away now. Class schedule, I gave the lecture on Kant. So then what are we doing next week? You have one chapter to read, 20 pages. Francis Schaeffer's book, chapter 8. And then you do need to write a reading summary of that chapter. I'm going to give a lecture next week on the mechanical view of the world. We touched a little bit on that tonight, but we're going to just see more of how modernism crashed and burned. Evolution, and then kind of see how this gets expressed through the changes in the art world. Paintings at this time is the most common form of art. Now also next week on October 8th, Caleb, the TA, is going to give you your midterm exam. So he's going to hand it out to you or email it to you next Thursday on October 8th, and then you have a week to take it home, print it out, take it home, and fill it out. Take the exam on your own. So no limitations on time. Well, I guess you got a week, but no time limitations. It's open note, it's open book, and so it's mostly going to be essay questions. And so it's almost going to be like you're writing short little mini papers. That's why it's legitimate to make it a take-home exam. So you'll be writing little essays, little papers, and you can use all your resources to do so, right? And you have a week to fill that out. So we'll give that to you on October 8th, and then you have to turn it in the next week on October 15th. And as you can see, there's no reading for that week on October 15th because we're giving you that whole week just to work on your exam. Okay, any questions about the class logistics? What to do, when it's due, how it's due?
We're turning in the midterms to Caleb as well, so as soon as we get done with it, we just email it out to him?
Yes, that would be best. Yep, so it might be best to type it out electronically so it's easy to email it to them. So same thing for people here in the class as for those taking it online, is just work electronically via email with Caleb. All right, well, we only got about 15 minutes left, and I will let you guys discuss your book reviews on the Tilter World. So spend 15 minutes here, the last 15 minutes of class, just sharing and talking about your thoughts of the book, like, dislike, agree, disagree. Share your thoughts from your book review.